Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Maria Gonçalves podcast. I am your host, Maria Gonçalves, and today we have a special guest, Jill McClennen. Did I say that correctly?
You did.
All right, all the way from New Jersey. She's a U.S. girl. She is a certified death doula. Her mission is to support you in finding clarity around death, dying, and grief. She is also an end of life coach and energy healer. By January 2020, she started her formal training, earning a certificate as a death doula through IAPC and completing a death doula mentorship with Jill Shook of Death Doula LA. Is that
hmm
correct?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, just want to make sure the LA is actually LA.
Yeah. No, her business name is Death Doula LA. That's it.
Oh, okay, that's so cool. And then
hmm
in January of 2023, she created a podcast, Seeing Death Clearly, to help people get comfortable hearing conversations about death, dying, and grief, while also learning that by embracing our mortality, we can live a better life. So, welcome to the podcast, Jill.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited. I love to talk about death and dying and grief and living life. And so I appreciate the opportunity.
I find it so interesting because your work is before they pass away, and my work, because I'm a professional psychic medium, so it's after they pass away when people
Mhm.
want to get the readings for their own healing and comfort. So, for those that are listening and never heard of a death doula, what is that?
So, a death doula is a person that provides completely non-medical care around the end of life. Depending on the doula, we all do things a little bit different. Some people will work only with a person that's dying. Some people will work with the person and their families, helping prepare for the death itself. A lot of us will sit with the people as they're dying, sit again with their loved ones. Some death doulas, I am one of them, but some death doulas will work with grief. So I like to say I'm before, during, and after death. That's kind of when I provide my support, but it depends on the doula. And it just is very similar to hospice in the care that's provided, but there's just no medical care. So it's more the emotional, spiritual, even physical support in the sense that we're there to help people. Really, I've seen doulas that they're like, I'll be the person that'll come in and I'll help you clean out all your stuff. So it just depends on what, their specialty is. But it's really needed work. It's work that used to be done typically by women. But just as a culture, we've gotten away from it. It's just a very lonely time for a lot of people when they're facing end of life. And so we're there to support our clients and their loved ones.
So, as a death doula, because I am curious, like, how far in advance do you help people? Like, do they have to have like a death diagnosis where the doctor's like, you only have 6 months to live? Is that when you step in, or do you step in a lot earlier?
Death doulas, because we are not, it's not like hospice, we can't take insurance. So all of us are just kind of private business people. That's why I started calling myself an end of life coach, because I think people understand what a life coach is. And as I was explaining to people the work that I do, they were like, oh, you almost sound like a life coach. And I was like, yeah, I guess kind of. I just am like very focused on the end of life. But really, people should start working with death doulas earlier when they are healthy before they have any type of a diagnosis. It's really better to do a lot of this work before we're in really like a crisis mode.
Yeah.
We need to think about what we want at the end of life. We need to talk to our families about it. We need to prepare ourselves because, as I'm sure you know, as a medium, people die all the time from all different things, unexpected. You wake up one day thinking your day is going to be normal, and by the end of the day, the person's gone. And so, if we wait until we need this information, if we wait until we're quote unquote prepared, to go in to the situation, it's really going to be harder. It doesn't mean that I can't work with people when they get a diagnosis. Most of the time I do. If somebody has a diagnosis, especially as they're like nearing kind of the end, that's when they'll tend to call me. But it's really better if we could do this work earlier, because then I get to know the person. I know what they like, I know more about them, and then I'm able to better support them. But again, it's kind of new in that people aren't necessarily looking for death doulas. Even people that are ill and could really use one, they don't know to look for us. And so I'm hoping over time that more and more people, again, every stage of life will start saying, maybe I should talk to a death doula, work through some of my fear, work through some of my anxiety, prepare myself, plan, talk to my family so that if something were to happen, especially something suddenly, we're not caught off guard and really then in that like crisis kind of mode that we really want to avoid if possible.
Yeah, because like when somebody passes away suddenly, you're in shock. You can't think straight, you don't know what to do. And then the grief will come in waves. And then what I find interesting, because my background is Portuguese and back home from our little town by the ocean, everybody's always talking about death. And then when we came to Canada, it's like if you try to talk about death, it's almost like, don't go there. That's a sad,
Yeah.
depressing topic. We don't want to talk about it. Meanwhile, like we grow up with, have you prepared your funeral? And also in Portugal, like on the weekends, on Sundays, everybody goes to the cemetery. Everybody goes to tell the stories of their loved ones, to clean the tombstones, like the whole village will be empty. But if you're looking for anybody, you go to the cemetery, and then they're always talking about preparing and the stories. And then I find like in Canada, no one wants to talk about it. Why do people not want to talk about death and dying? I find that so fascinating.
Yeah, and it is very common where in United States and Canada, what you would really consider a lot of cases like the Western societies, they tend to not want to talk about death and dying. And I believe there's a few reasons. Partially, it's superstition. People believe that if we talk about it, it's going to bring it to us. If I talk about the fact that my husband might die one day, that means it's going to make him die. If I talk about the fact that I might die one day, it means that I'm wanting it to happen. It's really strange because I even get it sometimes with people where I'll have conversations with them and they'll say, "Oh, so you're fine if your husband dies." And I'm like, "Well, no, I'm still not fine. I don't want my husband to die anytime soon. But
Yeah.
if he were to die, because somebody's husband's not coming home tonight, and why not mine, right? Like I'm not
Yeah.
special. If he were to die younger, I will be more prepared because we've had the conversations, because we've talked about what we want, because we've done the things that we need to do. It doesn't mean that I'm okay with it, and it doesn't mean that I want it to happen, and it doesn't mean that I'm making it happen. If it was that easy, honestly, I want $1 million, but that's not showing up anytime soon. So talking about it's not going to make it happen, but there's definitely a little bit of superstition in that.
Yeah.
And the fact that if we grew up in a culture where it was not talked about, it's so uncomfortable when somebody tries to talk to us about it because we've never done it. And so a lot of it is that when people do come in, somebody like you that's like, no, it's cool. I love to talk about something like this, or it's fine to talk about it. But then it pushes on that uncomfortable button inside me. And so I shut the conversation down. And so we just get stuck in this cycle that if we're not used to hearing people talk about it, if we're not talking about it ourselves, when somebody tries to, it feels uncomfortable. And yes, it's an emotional topic. Again, no matter how prepared you are for it, it's still sad when people you love die. And so it can really touch on unprocessed grief that we have inside of us. It touches on the negative experiences that we have had or that we've seen, because unfortunately, a lot of people have had negative experiences around somebody that they love dying. The death itself is not the traumatic part. It's the stuff that leads up to the death. It's the illnesses. It's the extended pain and suffering that some people go through. And so if you're holding all this in, you haven't thought about it, you haven't processed it, and somebody brings up the topic, it's going to make you feel a little bit emotional because that wants to come up and we're busy shoving it down. And then when somebody talks about it, it brings it up, whether we want it to or not. So I think that's a lot of it, is just the discomfort because we're out of practice, which is really partially why I started my podcast, because I wanted people to just get used to hearing conversations. I was having so many really wonderful conversations with people about death and about dying and about grief and about how it changed our life and how we live differently. And I thought people need to hear this stuff because it doesn't have to be a like heavy, morbid, scary, overwhelming conversation. It really can just be a conversation, but if we're not used to hearing it, it's going to seem scary.
That is true. And I find when people share the stories, um, I don't know, when people share the stories, it's almost like, oh, you went through that too? So you don't feel so alone anymore. Cause I'll hear that. And then I know years ago we had an acquaintance from a networking group, and she had passed away, and she was so, so loved by the community. And they talked about how, and she was a healer too, and she had done all the inner work, so death didn't scare her. And they talked about how her passing, she had a smile on her face when she passed away. I thought, oh, that's so beautiful. And then you hear people talking, and it just takes one person to have the courage to share. And then once you have the courage to share, then the other people are like, oh, I can talk about this. Like, who do you find are your clients? Are they more the people that are getting ready to pass, or is it the family to help them deal with the passing of a loved one that's coming up?
So far, this is one of the problems. And I say problem, I mean, nothing's ever really a problem, but this is one of the challenges, we'll say, of being a death doula, is that most of us don't really have a lot of clients. So I haven't had enough clients, even though I've had my business now for 4 years, to really say that this is the norm for me.
Yes.
Honestly, I've mainly worked with people who are grieving. That tends to be when people have reached out to me because somebody that they love has died. And then somebody else that knows me knows them, and they'll say, hey, can you help them, they're really having a hard time, they're not processing the death very well, and maybe you'd be able to help out. So I've actually worked with a couple people around grief. I've worked with a few people whose loved ones dying, not even that the loved one will work with me, it's more they're like, hey, my grandfather's dying, I'm not processing this well. Can you help me? He won't talk to you though. He's old school. He wants nothing to do with
Yeah.
this, but I need the help. So I've done that a few times as well, helped people prepare for their loved one to die. And I have worked with a couple people that are, the ones that are ill, that are nearing death. So there hasn't been any normal. What I would say as far as what would be ideal, again, like I would love to have more people, especially if they get a terminal diagnosis, to contact me to work with them and their family to prepare for what's going to happen, even if they're doing treatments. It's like, let's talk about, because that's the thing too. Sometimes people get terminal diagnosis and the doctor will say, okay, well, we need to do surgeries and we need to try these different treatments and we're going to put you on this medication and then we're going to try this experimental thing and we're going to do all these things. But then when I talk to the person, they're like, I don't really know if that's what I want. Like I don't want to go through, potentially years of pain and suffering if I'm just going to die anyway at the end of it. But they don't know how to ask the right questions. They don't know what questions to ask their doctor. They don't know how to have that conversation with their family members that are like, no, we're going to fight, fight, fight. And they're thinking, I don't want to fight anymore. I'm tired. I don't feel well. I don't know if I want to make my life worse to just die at the end of it anyway, if I could just actually enjoy what time I have left. But if we don't know to ask those questions, we're not going to ask the right questions. And so that's where I really would love to work with more people to help them just get what it is they want, with no judgment on my part. If somebody decides to go for all the treatments, sure, do it. But also, if that's not what they really want, I don't want them to go through that, but they don't know to ask the right questions. So that's where really, again, ideally, I would love to work with more people and work with their families, because there is the people too that they say, well, I wanted to have this conversation with my kids or my spouse or my parents or my siblings, whatever it is, but they won't have the conversation with me because it's uncomfortable. And I have mediated conversations with people that have gone through what I call an end of life care plan. And like, we talk about what you want as diseases progress, just as aging progresses, what it is that people want throughout the whole process. And then I will have a meeting with them and their family member to go through the plan, to talk about it, to answer questions, to just help that conversation flow a little bit without getting overly emotional. And then somebody feeling like I can't share what I really feel because I'm feeling uncomfortable about it. So that's kind of where we're at now with end of life doulas. We don't tend to have the clients that we're hoping to work with, because most people, even now, when I say I'm a death doula, when I first started this, I would say at least 9 out of 10 people would say, wait, what? What do you do?
Yeah.
Now, maybe about half the people I say it to will say, oh, I heard about that. I read about it in an article, or I saw it somewhere, online, whatever it is. But still, most people don't know that we exist. And so they're not necessarily like out searching for death doulas. And the few that are will find us, but there's not that many that actually think, oh, I could use a death doula. And we need more professionals to understand too where we fit in. And that has been a little bit of a challenge as well.
I find for myself, like my dad is in a nursing home. And when I go in, it's so weird. Like the last 2 weeks, I keep meeting people as I'm going into the nursing home and they're coming out and their loved one just died or is about to die.
Yeah.
And then now, and it's almost like, the universe spirit places you there and they just start to unpack, to share the grief that they're going through. And then I find a lot of them are alone because they'll be like, my kids didn't want to come. My
Yeah.
significant other, they don't want to deal with it. It's my parent. I have to be there. I'm doing it all alone. So, and then my heart goes out to them and I'm like, listen, we're going to sit down. We'll talk for an hour. If I just need to sit here and listen to you. Because do you find like people just need somebody to hear them because it's such an uncomfortable topic, not for everybody, but for some people. Yeah, do you find that? Do you notice that?
A lot of people just want to be heard, for sure. It was a practice in learning to listen and not try to fix, not try to solve, not try to offer solutions or advice. People want to voice what their experience was, and without that judgment, without that feeling of somebody's going to think this is weird. Because that's the thing too, as I'm, again, I'm sure with the space that you work in, I find that like you and I do very similar work. We're just on different sides of the line. We're like, I'm working with the souls before they cross over. You're working with them after they cross over. But there's some weird stuff that happens when people are near that line. And so when people say, my parent was talking to people that weren't there. They were talking to people that died years ago. They were talking about holding a baby that they miscarried, in the 40s. Like, all these things that it really freaks some people out, where
Yeah.
I'm like, well, no, they're almost there. They're like crossing over. So of course the line blurs. So it's kind of like little parts are like bleeding through on both ends. And it doesn't scare me. It doesn't upset me. It doesn't freak me out. Where some people, they want to just be like, oh, they're just hallucinating. They were just making it up. They don't know what's happening. It's the drugs that they're on. I'm like, I don't think that's true. I really don't think that's true. And it's not just, again, it's not just me that doesn't think that's true. If you talk to people that have worked in hospice, they'll tell you the same things. You see some strange things when people are nearing the end of life. And a lot of people get so uncomfortable hearing about it because it challenges their beliefs about the afterlife and about spirits and about all that stuff. And it's like, it's okay, to be challenged. I don't think there's anything wrong with having our beliefs challenged a little bit.
Oh, I like that. And I find you have the most interesting conversations in that space because now it's happening. You can't ignore that it's happening. I remember one elderly woman absolutely loved her. And she comes up to me and she's like, they just told me my husband's going to pass in a few hours. She was kind of in shock and still processing because he just
Mhm.
got ill a couple of days. And she's like, but he's in a coma, like and I'm like, he can still hear you. Talk to him. Oh, but the
Yeah.
doctors say he can't hear anything. Just talk. His
Yeah.
soul lives forever, whether you get hand movements, not hand movements. And then I'm always like, remember, like we're grieving, letting them go, but the family on the other side, the spirit world, is celebrating and welcoming them home. Like there's a big party happening on the other side because they're going to be reunited with all the other family members that have gone before them. And then that brought her comfort, just knowing she could still talk to him, even though he couldn't respond. Because there's that, I don't know, like disbelief that, oh my goodness, they can still hear me, but they're not moving their face. Like I'm not getting any confirmation back from
Mhm.
their physical body. So I find that interesting how spirit uses us to work with people in different ways. I did want to ask you, um, because I was on your website and I was reading the part about you. And you talk about how you got into it because of your grandmother.
Mhm.
So can you share that story with our listeners, please?
Yeah, of course. My grandmother and I were so close. Like she basically raised me. I had a single mom. She just, her and I were like two peas in a pod, basically. And so when she was getting ready to turn 90, I was living in California at the time. And my husband and I, we had just gotten married and we said, we want to open a bakery. And she said to us, well, why don't you move home to New Jersey? Because then you can live with me. It'll keep me in my house. My grandfather built her that house when they got married, I think in 1937. So, like, he built her the house. She lived on a farm. She moved into that house. She wanted to die there. And so she said, it'll keep me in my house. You can live here. You don't have to pay me rent. It'll keep me here. And then you can go and open your bakery. So that's what we did, except we moved home, and within about, I would say it was a week, she found a lump in her chest, not in her breast, but it was like up above closer to her shoulder. And so we took her to the doctor and he said, oh, it's probably nothing. Like, that's not a common place to have cancer. It's probably nothing, but we're going to do some surgery just to take it out anyway. And so as he was doing the surgery, he said, actually, I was wrong. It is cancer. And so at 90 years old, we found out she had cancer. And that's where, again, the idea of like asking questions. If I could go back and do it again, I would have probably asked some different questions and maybe not had her go through the radiation and all these things that caused her a lot of pain and suffering when she was 90. Like how long did we really think she was going to live? But either way, we did it. We opened our bakery, we had a baby, we went through like life. And so as she neared the end of life, my baby was 6 months old. Um, we had sent her to the hospital for an infection from getting radiation on her wound. And so they said, we're going to send her home on hospice. Like, there's really nothing else we could do at this point. And I remember she was very Catholic. Her favorite nun came to visit her at the hospital. And I went and I picked her up and they said, who's going to take care of her? And I said, oh, well, I am, because I live with her anyway. I've been taking care of her for the last 4 years. And so I brought her home that night. And I really think that when Sister Tarcisia came to visit her, she had told me days later, when I saw your grandmother, she said to me, like, I'm ready to die. Like, it's good. It's my time. I'm at peace with it. I'm ready to go. And I think part of her started to transition then. Her body didn't catch up. But once she decided she was ready to go, she was never the same. Like I thought she was going to come home and still just be grandma and maybe just sleep a little bit more and then just, close her eyes and go to sleep and die because that's what I had seen in movies and on
Yeah.
TV. It's like people either die really traumatically, like blown up and shot and all this stuff, or they very peacefully go to sleep and like don't wake up. And so that's what I expected to happen. And so the first night when I was home with her, and she gets up in the middle of the night, and I have the baby because he's 6 months old, like, 6 months old
Yeah.
babies are like attached to you. And I go downstairs and I'm talking to her and I'm trying to get her settled. And she's like talking to people that aren't in the room. And I'm like, okay, I don't know what's happening. And then she says, oh, my granddaughter has a baby the same age as yours. And I said, but I am your granddaughter. And she said, no, you're not. You're the nurse. And I was like, uh, okay, I have no idea what's going on here. And I was so confused. I was so confused. I was so overwhelmed. I was so upset because I didn't understand what was happening. And hospice came in and they were so amazing. I mean, first thing, I was like, I don't understand what's happening. Who's she talking to? And why doesn't she know who I am? And like, what's going on? And they were so lovely where they were doing what they needed to do for my grandmother, but they were answering every single question that I had. And then everything I'd say, they'd be like, no, it's normal. It's natural. It's okay. This is what happens when people near the end of life, like she will probably talk to people. She'll talk about packing her bags. Like it's going to get a little weird, but this is okay. This is what happens. And so then once I started to relax and get comfortable with it, then when she was talking about people that were singing behind me and I'm looking around and I'm like, there's nobody there, or talking to, again, her dead siblings and her dead best friends and like all these people that were like supposedly showing up and talking to her and she's talking back and ignoring me like I'm not in the room. Rather than being scared and upset, I got curious and I thought it was fascinating and I was like really interested in what was happening. And then, she got to the point where she did die. I was not with her, but I think again, that was one of those things where the infection was getting worse. One of the hospice nurses was like, you need to be very careful. You have this baby. If you're cleaning this wound and you're taking care of a baby, you have to be really careful. And so I think she heard that and she was like, I gotta get out of here. Like it's time to
Yeah.
go. And so I said to them at that point, they were giving me a break. They took her somewhere else to try to like get the infection under control and to give me a little bit of a break. And I said to the nurse, can you please call me? I want to be here when she dies. Partially, again, out of curiosity. I wanted to see like, was I going to see anything? Was I going to feel anything? Like, was I going to hear something? Like, I wanted to see what happens at the moment of death. And she said, oh yeah, we can tell, usually within hours that somebody's going to die. There's certain things that happen. We usually know. And so I get home, we all get settled. I get a phone call and the nurse says, I went and I checked on her and nothing, like normal, right? She's
Yeah.
like, I went back an hour later and she was gone. None of the normal signs, none of the normal anything. And my mom said, she heard you say you were coming back and she thought, no way is she going to get out of bed. No way is she leaving that baby. I'm doing this on my own terms. And so I was not able to be there with her, which I really wanted to be. But then I did end up dreaming about her and she
Yeah.
visited me in a dream and it was beautiful. And we had a really lovely conversation. And then it was interesting. We were in like a high-rise building and she was like, it's time for me to go. And she basically like got on an elevator and just like went up. And I was like, okay. And I've never dreamt about her since. And that was right after she died. So I was like, well, she visited me once. And then she was like, I have to go. Like, it's time. So it's okay. But after that, I said to my husband, I think I want to be a hospice nurse. And he was like, whatever you want, honey, like whatever you want to do. But I had a bakery, I had a baby,
Yeah.
life. And so it took me many years. We closed the bakery. We had a second baby. We moved. I had another job, actually had two jobs. And so as I started thinking, I was getting ready to turn 40, and I was like, what do I want to do though for the rest of my career? Because I don't know if I want to be in a kitchen until I'm 65. They're really hard work. Professional kitchens are really hard work.
Yes, yes.
And so I heard of a death doula in 2019. And as soon as I heard it, I was like, that's it. That's what I want to do. That's the support that I want to provide people. That's where I want to go. And so I started researching and started looking into it, and then started my training in 2020, and then thought it was going to take me many years to get my training done, but life had different plans because all of a sudden I was home and I had a lot of time on my hands. So by July of 2020, I had everything pretty much set up and ready to go. And so now here I am 4 years later. And it's
Yeah.
crazy that it's been 4 years.
I'm getting all emotional. Like when you were sharing this story, oh, I just have to wipe some tears here because
Oh,
I am that medium that will cry during your reading, but
that
I'm
is
in
not a
control.
bad thing. Yeah.
But when you were talking about your mom, sorry, not your mom, your grandmother, and like you could feel the love that she had for you, the love you had for her, and sharing that story where the hospice nurse is like, be careful with your baby, just so the baby doesn't get sick. And grandma hearing that and going into that protection mode of, it's time for me to go and I need to protect my granddaughter. Oh my God, I'm getting so emotional. So weird.
Oh.
I think because you know what it is too? It triggers memories of me. I was there when my grandmother passed. Uh, oh my goodness, I was there for every grandparent that passed. Like my mom's dad, I was there, my mom's mom, and then we were in Portugal when that happened. So in Portugal, they didn't have funeral homes back then. So
Hmm.
once they passed away, my dad would prepare the dead bodies. Like he would prepare them,
Oh.
then we would him and my mom or my uncles and my aunts, they would dress my grandmother or grandfather, and then the casket would go in the house inside your living room. Like the houses were built to be a funeral parlor when needed for family members. And
Hmm.
then within 24 hours, we would bury our loved ones. So when you were sharing that story of your grandmother, that brought me back to my grandmother and her passing, but her passing was so traumatic. And I
Mm.
still remember it because with my grandmother, I still remember like it happened today. And I was like 12 years old, 12, 13 years old. I was in grade 8. So I was at 13.
Hmm.
And my grandmother's just like, I need to go to the washroom. So my dad's like, help me carry her to the washroom because she had a hard time walking and she had a
Hmm.
little bed and the bedroom was there. And we happened to go to Portugal on vacation. And my grandmother, because she hadn't seen my mom in a while, she was like, I don't want to die until I see my youngest daughter. So we go there, we're enjoying the vacation near the end of the vacation. Uh, yeah, so we go back to the room and my grandmother's like, I want to go to the washroom. And my dad and my mom carry her, my dad and my mom, me and my mom, look at me. My brain's like mush trying to remember this story. So we take her to the washroom, my dad and I, and right there, she has like a massive heart attack. And she's like, I don't feel
Oh.
good. Take me back to my bed. So me and my dad carry her, drag her, try to carry her back to her bed, and I think she's like, I just need a sip of water. So my dad gives her a sip of water and we lay her down and she passed away.
Hmm.
And yeah, this is a little dramatic. When you're 13, it's a little intense. But when you were telling your story, I was like, oh my God, that brought me back. And maybe those that are listening, maybe they watch one of their grandparents or loved ones and it brings you back. But what I remember is the love that a grandmother has for their granddaughter, for their grandchildren, for their children, for their family. So I find that so fascinating. So apologies, I cried, but you brought me to
No.
that moment in time. And that was a long time ago. It was like 40 years ago, but it
Mhm.
still touches my heart like it happened today. Isn't that
Yeah.
interesting? Because we never forget love. Yeah.
Hmm.
So then as a death doula, because I find that super fascinating, um, that you do that. Have other people shared stories like I just went and shared a story with you when you share
Yeah.
stories of your grandmother?
Oh yeah, I mean, that's one of the things where, um, I will go out into my community and I'll have like booths at events and stuff to talk to people. Again, now I started designing shirts to kind of encourage conversations. So when people see something that they're like, oh, that's interesting, like this one's just one for my podcast, but I have some that just say like different things that have to do with like death and dying or living my life fully before I die. And so people will be like, well, that's really interesting. Like, what's that mean? And then once I say like, oh, I'm a death doula, either people run away because they're like, oh, I don't need to think about that yet. And they run away. Or they tell me all their stories about their loved ones dying and what the experience was like. Yeah, but it's like we were saying earlier, that is partially why some people get so uncomfortable about the conversation because they're like, oh, it's going to make me cry. Well, what's wrong with crying? Why is it that our culture
Right.
tells us there's something wrong with crying? Exactly. There's nothing wrong with
Right.
crying. There's nothing wrong with showing emotion. There's nothing wrong with feeling emotions, but we're so afraid of it. And so, yes, I hear so many stories about people's experiences, and some of them are really difficult. Some people, again, have had really difficult experiences when it comes to a loved one's death, especially if it was a child, somebody that was younger. I've had people come up to me and, again, see like one of my shirts. And one guy, he was like, I just experienced it with my wife. She left me with 3 young children. I wish I had somebody like you at the time to help me get through it. So I hear a lot of stories that yes, it triggers a little something in mirror in me. It triggers my fear. It triggers my anxieties around one of my children dying or my husband dying and leaving me alone. So I get it, right? I totally understand. But again, avoiding this conversation is not going to keep me safe. It's not going to keep my children safe. It's not going to keep my husband alive any longer.
Yeah.
But I love that when we have conversations about this, I'm not, and I don't mean this in a judgmental way. I really hate going to parties or places where everybody just wants to chit chat and gossip. I can't take it. I don't like it. I avoid it like at all cost. I don't want to talk about that kind of stuff. I don't want to gossip about other people. What I want to talk about is the things that are really important and really emotional and really vulnerable and really just intimate. And I find that these conversations about death and dying, they're so intimate because it brings me into a very intimate experience in somebody else's life. And I love that. I think it's beautiful. And we need more of that, I think, in our culture and in our daily life. That real intimate experience also helps us have empathy for other people and realize that we are all going through the same things. We all have the same fears. We all have the experiences of losing people that we love. And it's okay to feel that sadness. It's okay to feel that grief. If anything, it's important. We need to actually feel it. We can't just pretend that we're quote unquote okay and like shove it down and act like we're not grieving and sad, which a lot of people do.
Oh, that is so true. And then when you push it down, push it down, push it down, and their loved ones pass away, now they have serious health issues because they've pushed it down so much over a long period of time because they wanted to be strong, right? And they had
Mhm.
no way of talking to somebody. So I feel like as we're having this conversation, you would become my best friend. I mean, like, I need a safe space to share the feelings that I'm feeling as my loved one is about to pass, or maybe they're getting ready to pass, just to have that listening ear, that non-judgmental, and to feel heard. Because that's what I am gathering from our interview. That's so important. And for those that are listening, uh, I think it's I think it's a fantastic idea. I think we need more people that do the work you do to help people process the emotions and not push them down.
Mhm.
Yeah. And then do you work, I'm just curious, with little kids and death and dying, or it's more with the adults right now?
Yeah, that's one of the things where I haven't worked with any children. As far as working with children that are dying, I'm not sure if I could because I have kids. And
Yeah.
I feel like it might be too triggering because I do actually volunteer at 2 hospitals locally. And I know the one in particular, when I was filling out the volunteer paperwork, they said, we have a pediatric section. Would you work there? And I was like, I'm not sure because that might be a little too much for me. But if a child was needing help to process the death of a loved one, or the fact that, grandpa or grandma or parents are sick and they're going to die, I could work with a child around that part.
Yeah.
But a sick child, I don't know if I could do it without becoming so emotional about it that I wouldn't be effective because I would be too caught up in my own emotions. But I will
Yeah.
also never say never. I try to stay open to all possibilities, but also really just kind of, that would be an area that I would be a little bit more hesitant. Um, just because, yeah, it is. It's a
Yeah.
little triggering for me, the thought of one of my children. Because again, there's part of me that knows right now they're both healthy, they're both at school, right? They're doing their thing,
Yeah.
but that could change at any point. That could change in a day, it could change in a year. And I'm grateful for all of the time that I have with them, that they're
Yeah.
here, that they're happy, that they're healthy. But I also do realize, without overly obsessing about it, without overly worrying about it, knowing that it could change. But that's really one of the benefits that I try to tell people too, that being okay with the fact that we're going to die, thinking about that fact really does help us live our life differently. Because I am so much more present now. I'm so grateful for every opportunity that I have to say I love you to my children, to spend time with them, to just really, again, even my husband, he's actually right now, he's on an airplane flying to Florida for work. Um, and again, I'm not worried, but at the same time, before he left, I made sure, like, I love you so much. Thank you for getting everything together before you left. Like, I'll see you when you get back, because I know that there's the chance that he might not come back. And I don't ever want to think back to the fact that I was too busy getting ready for an interview, or I was too busy rushing off to work, or I was too busy doing the things that I used to do before I got into this work, where I would be stressed and anxious and overwhelmed and not present and not giving my family the things that are important to me. Because again, one of the things that people tell me when they're dying is their regrets, the things that were important to them that they didn't put as much time and energy into. Because when I volunteer at the hospital, I talk to a lot of people. That's where most of my experience is like sitting in the hospital talking to people. And they're really helping me get clear on the fact that the emails, the interviews, the things that I used to put as like higher in importance because I had to do this thing, I had to be here, I had to go there. In the long run, when I'm dying, not that this interview is not amazing, but this interview is not going to be what I'm thinking about when I'm dying. I'm going to be thinking about the time that I spent with my family. I'm going to be thinking about the dinner that we had yesterday together. I'm going to be thinking about the softball games that we go to. I'm going to be thinking about the things that I used to not put as much importance on. And now I know that that's the things that are going to mean something to them when I'm gone. It's going to be the thing that I'm thinking back on when I'm dying. And I want to make sure that that's where my effort and my focus is really placed. And all of us could live that way if we were to really, really get okay with the fact that this will end one day, that this experience is not going to be here
Yeah.
one day. This is not going to be where I am, where my reality is, where I'm going to be. I don't know. Like maybe
Yeah.
my spirit will be somewhere else. Maybe my spirit will still hang out here, but I'm not going to be able to hug my children. I'm not going to be able to taste things. I'm not going to be able to have the senses that I have while I'm here in this physical body. And so I want to have this physical body and enjoy the experiences that I'm having now with the people that I love the most. And everything else can wait. I'm not worried about it anymore.
Well spoken. Well said. I agree. I think too, I don't know about you, but I notice like when I'm younger, you're in that corporate mood of go, 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 go. And then you get older and you're just like, what am I doing? like stop, smell the roses, and just live in that gratitude space day by day, because what do they say? Today's a present and tomorrow's not promised for nobody. So
Mhm.
yeah, and that's we do the same thing every time somebody goes on a vacation. We're like, oh my God, I love you. But it's all the hugs and the kisses. I mean, that's so interesting how you pointed that out. Yeah, because we love our families, right?
Mhm.
You know what? I have enjoyed this time with you. I just want to let people know that if they want to contact you, you do have a website, endoflifeclarity.com. You guys can find her on Instagram at End of Life Clarity. She's on Facebook, again, End of Life Clarity. She's on LinkedIn as Jill McClennen. Correct? Did I
Mhm.
say that right?
Yeah, you did.
And she just started a YouTube channel, so please go listen to that. Go check it out. It's End of Life Clarity. And the name of your podcast, you're wearing the t-shirt with the name of your podcast.
Yeah.
We could see it.
Yes.
See
So,
Death Clearly podcast. I love that.
correct.
You have merch on your website too, if people
Yeah.
want to go on over and support her too and support the work that she does.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And that's where when I named the podcast, I tried to go with the business name, which was End of Life Clarity, but change it up a little bit. So I was like, oh, Seeing Death Clearly is the podcast. But yes, you can find me on all the social medias, on my website. Again, now I have my YouTube where you could watch the videos of my podcast. So I'm a little bit of everywhere at this point.
Yeah, and you have like free offerings too on your website, correct?
I do. Yeah, I have different workbooks, right? One of them is about how to appreciate life while you're still here. I have some resources for caregivers because, again, that's a big job being an end of life caregiver. So I do have different things. I try to do, different like Zoom sessions and things throughout the year on different topics. So I'm always doing, still always doing. I'm trying to slow down, but I am still always doing stuff.
All right, so please go to her website and check out her offerings there because she does a lot of amazing stuff. If you're interested in connecting with her professionally to book a session for her to help you as a death doula, please do reach out with her. At the end of the podcast, there will be all the live links and on the YouTube channel. So please go check that out. And thank you so much for being with us today. Okay. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.